Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening. There's always a global audience in this group, so very warm welcome to wherever you are dialing in from. I love to see the chat like buzzing already, so thank you so much. I still see the attendee list running up, so I'll just wait a couple more minutes before we get started. People from all over the world, Singapore, Florida, Hyderabad, Houston, Kansas City, Dallas. Thank you for joining in and welcome. All right, I think we're good to get started. Lot more people dialing in, so thank you. All right, so this is the August session for Employee Center Academy. We will talk about what this is, what is Academy and what the topic is. But just so you know, the topic for today is universal request, and very excited to talk about it. And we have a special guest to discuss this topic with you. For those of you who are joining today for the first time, Employee Center Academies are essentially sessions designed for you to interact with the product team, literally connect with the experts in ServiceNow and ask your questions and interact. We try to not make this a presentation and in fact, do some live configurations and a lot of live Q&A. So please do engage with the Q&A panel and ask your questions. We do this every month, so we will be back with another session next month on September 20th. The thumb rule is every third Wednesday, you would have an Employee Center Academy session at the same time. If you have registered for this, you should have received email invites or calendar invites for every month. So please make sure you're accepting them and keeping an eye out for the reminders from Zoom. Let's just cover the logistics quickly. So we do have a Q&A panel, and I please request everyone to use the Q&A panel for asking your questions. Chat is exactly for what we are using chat right now. Just connecting with the participants, just keeping your comments in the chats, like whatever you like, don't like, and all that. But please keep all your questions in the Q&A panel. And the slides for this will be available on the events page on Employee Center Community, and the recording for this will be posted on both the events page as well as on YouTube. So please don't worry about taking notes, and we will definitely have the recording and slides for this available. All right, let's talk about the topic today. So the topic for today is universal request. As many of you have started looking into a multi-department portal with Employee Center, a question comes in, how do we help employees who don't often know whether it's an IT request or an HR request or someone else? It's like employees are often not thinking who would serve them. Something like universal request comes in extremely handy in that case. Many of you may have heard about this term. You will learn a lot more about this through our expert, Carolyn Fahim, who is also a Principal Success Manager at ServiceNow. And Caroline, you want to add to that introduction and take it forward from here?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Pooja. Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Fahim, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all about Universal Request. This is a product that is near and dear to my heart. I was the outbound product manager when it was first released in the Quebec and Rome releases. And I've seen a lot of improvements made to the product since then. I'm happy to walk you through it today. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. So the topic for today, we will, of course, cover what is universal request. We'll do a live demo, and we will also discuss some leading practices for implementing universal request. So with that, Carolyn, I'll hand it over to you to just take the screen share and run it from there.
Sounds good. Just give me 1 second.
Thanks, Carolyn.
All righty. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, all good.
Perfect. All right, so as Pooja was introducing the subject, the reason why we introduced universal request is because employees are increasingly confused as where to go when they need services from their organization. And I want to make it clear that this is intended for employee-facing services, not external-facing services, such as our CSM product suite. So this is really for employees looking towards their organization for their enterprise services. A lot of us have been hired throughout the pandemic. A lot of us, such as myself, are actual virtual employees. And when we need a service from our organization to do our jobs, it can be confusing and the lines are a little bit blurred around which department is supposed to deliver those services. And they kind of have to guess where they should go for help. For example, if I am an employee on a work visa, I might not know if I should go to HR for something relating to travel or legal, or if I need something to do with my payroll, it might be HR, it might be finance. It's becoming increasingly challenging to know where to go as an employee. But also on the agent side, it can also be difficult when you have something that touches multiple different departments to collaborate across departments, because services are not just in silo when we're talking about enterprise services, especially at a larger scale. And so what we really wanted to solve is the challenge of employees trying to figure out where to go, but also for agents to figure out how to work with each other within an organization. And this is to establish a better connected enterprise service management model or global business services model. And so the analogy that I like to give people is that universal request is kind of like the docking station that we created that allows our other products that were built for purpose to go into the depth of each of our product capabilities to connect to each other. So it does not replace the other products. It is just a connective layer to bring everything together. We, of course, have dedicated teams building our IT products, our HR products, our workplace, finance, and legal. And these all have capabilities that are built specific for those types of industries. However, we wanted to have a connective layer for the employee so that they don't need to see the behind the scenes mechanics of everything that's going on. They just want one layer to interact with their organization. And this is where it ties in very closely to the employee center portal, because that is the layer that they are interfacing with to be able to request services, follow up on services, and also, of course, self-serve. And then from behind the scenes, when the requests are coming into these different departments or different agents, the universal request connective tissue allows the agents to transfer work between each other whenever work needs to be passed along or even done in parallel. So it helps eliminate the need for dead ends and allows that simple view for the employee. So when we look at the key product outcomes, we have outcomes for the employee as well as the agents. So for the employee, we are giving them a universal help section to go. Now, a lot of customers might be worried about this capability of universal help. This is not intended to replace all of the specific catalog items that you have. This is a last resort, and I'll show you in the demo where we place this strategically. But basically, we want employees to be able to search for a service and find it. And what we have built is the ability for the employee to request a universal help form in the event that they couldn't find what they needed. So we give them the opportunity to look for a service. If they find the service they need, that's what we want them to do. If they can't, at that point, the employee is faced with the option of picking up the phone or sending an email. And that's where we give them the option to log a universal request as a way to stop that phone call and email. But it isn't the first entry point that we would want the employee to take. We also give them a unified ticket page, and this is built in within Employee Center. It gives them a single request experience so they can start with one request. And if that request needs to be transferred over because they submitted the wrong one, or because that request has a part 2 or part 3 or part 4 with another department, they only have to log the first one, and then it can easily be transferred by the agent so that they don't have to log multiple tickets. It also gives the employee security so that if they are logging something that is marked as restricted, only the department for that request will be able to see those details, even if the request gets transferred. They will not be able to see the tickets that were submitted beforehand. So for example, if the request comes in for HR and there's sensitive information in there, if HR then needs IT to take action and they transfer it over to IT, IT will not be able to see the details of the HR case. They will only see the details on the IT ticket, and the agent transferring has the ability to include information or not. So we have an increased security model, and I also have a slide that talks about what is copied over and what isn't visible when a request is marked as restricted. From the agent side, we have collaboration across departments. So I see in the chat, we have a question on how is this different from a general inquiry service? So the general inquiry service is going to be built off of one table across a specific product. So for example, if you have ITSM, you might build a general inquiry service on the IT service catalog, or you might have an HR general inquiry. So that's one specific catalog item that's built on one of our products. The universal request would tie the different products together. So it would allow you to go from an IT incident, for example, to an HR case, to a workplace case, to a legal case, et cetera. And this is that connective tissue docking station that I was referring to before. The agent also has context to see if they were intended to get the context from the previous ticket, they will see those details. They will also see the details on the universal request if they have permission to do so. They will also have the ability to route either manually or through our AI-based capabilities using Universal Request Pro. And they will also be able to track the SLAs for their specific part of the service. But from a GBS perspective, they'll be able to monitor the full SLAs of the universal request. Now, before we go into specifics on how universal request works, I always like to level set with the different scenarios in which a universal request would present itself. So a lot of our customers are familiar with the unstructured request scenario, and that's the one I was describing earlier, where an employee is looking for something and they've searched for it. They couldn't find the answers in the search results page. At that point, they will go ahead and log a request for help, which creates a universal request. Now, the worst case scenario in that path is that it creates just a general UR that needs to be triaged, and that would go to the routing agent. Through our AI capabilities, we can automate the triaging so that you don't have to do this manually. Obviously, there's going to have to be a certain degree of manual intervention if, for example, they picked it up, the automation picked it up incorrectly, or it's still in the learning phase because it needs about 30,000 records to learn. However, there are other options to accelerate that triaging as well. So when I demo it, I'll show you what I'm talking about, but I do want to emphasize that the triaging is only needed if it comes in as an unstructured request in this scenario, where the employee does not select a department because they are asked that question if they would like to select a department or not, and if the predictive intelligence doesn't automatically detect what record it should be. So in that worst case scenario, it would come in as a universal request without any other record associated to it. The routing agents would be monitoring a queue of universal requests that are active that have no primary ticket associated. If it has a primary ticket associated, there's no routing needed. It's already in the hands of the fulfiller. If there is no primary ticket associated, that's where a ticket needs to be created. So the routing agent would create the department ticket, whether that's an incident, an HR case, a workplace case. It could even be a service catalog item. Any of your employee-facing records can be created off the universal request. At that point, it goes to the fulfiller queue. So they're working off of the queues that they are already familiar with. We do not want the fulfiller agents to have to work out of a different queue or even have to learn a new type of task. So our guiding principle is that agents do not work on universal requests. They work on their respective department tickets that they've already been familiar with out of their respective workspaces that they're already working out of. The fact that there's a universal request is for the benefit of the employee to monitor one record, and it is of the benefit to the fulfiller if they do need to make a transfer. If they don't need to make a transfer, it doesn't matter that there's a universal request. The agent's working out of their queue, and then they can just go ahead and close the ticket as needed. But they are not monitoring a separate queue for universal requests. So that is the path of the unstructured request. The more common scenario that we would prefer is for scenario 2. When the employee searches for a service and has the benefit of finding what they needed. This is where you get to keep all of your existing catalog items. And that is, again, our recommendation is to keep them and optimize them. If they submit a request, for example, a payroll discrepancy case on the portal, then they can append a universal request to it. So this is done as the admin persona. In our maintain items table, you can go ahead and certify all of your existing record producers and catalog items through either a system property or a field on the record producer or catalog item. It says it's called certify UR. Basically, what that means is whenever that record producer or catalog item is submitted, it creates that record that it did before, plus a universal request alongside it. And the benefit of that is that if the request needs to be transferred because it was logged incorrectly, or because there's a part 2, 3, 4, etc., the agent who received the first request can go ahead and make that transfer. Without the universal request linked to that record, they would not be able to transfer it to another one of our products. All right, so our preference is scenario 2. Scenario 1, again, is when the employee tried and couldn't find what they needed. Then they submitted the general request help. So you'll see a lot of our customers will ask us about routing agents. The need for the routing agent should become less and less over time, because the more specific services you create, the less often employees are going to be searching and failing to find what they need. And it will go directly to the correct agent the first time. In addition, if you have predictive intelligence turned on, the automation should route the ticket accordingly. So you don't need to have a team monitoring all universal requests. You just need to have the team monitoring the universal requests that have no primary ticket associated. And that number should decrease, and it should be one of the metrics that you are tracking over time. All right. Now I'm going to take a pause for a second just to check on the chat. Pooja, is there anything that any question that you wanted to call out specifically?
Yeah, just a couple of clarification questions. Someone was asking, how is this different from a general inquiry service? I believe you kind of answered that, but just to elaborate a little bit more.
Yep, I did answer that earlier. So basically the general inquiry service request you would create is for one specific catalog and one table and one product, but it doesn't allow you to transfer to a different product. Whereas the universal request can link your general inquiry service and then allow you to do a transfer outside of that product if needed. So it can work with your general inquiry services. It doesn't have to replace them. All right.
Awesome. Then there was one more, the routing agent. Can that be who is it, that person? Is that like a tier 1 agent? IT,
yep.
HR?
That's a great question. So there can be different models for the tier 1 routing agents. That could be a centralized team of tier 1 agents. So if you have a GBS, Global Business Services model, where you have a centralized tier 1 team, it could be that group that's just universal request triaging, and they could just be monitoring all universal requests that have no primary ticket. And then just when the requests come in, they just create the right department tickets off of it. The other option is to have dispersed tier 1s across departments. So tier 1 for HR, tier 1 for IT, tier 1 for legal. And it's not a new team that you need to spin up. Organizations already have tier 1s to some capacity. It's just an additional scorecard that they would be looking at. Anytime that number is above 0, they should just go in, look at it, and then create the ticket off of that. But it can be your existing tier 1s, whether that's specific to each department or one centralized group, depending on your organization.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. So I think a lot of these other questions are going to be resolved throughout the presentation. So I'm going to keep going. But at the end, we'll take a look at all of them and see if there's any that are outstanding that need to be addressed. All right. Okay. So what problems does universal request solve? If you're at an organization and any of these problems stand out to you, that's probably an indicator that you should look into universal request. So the most common problems that we hear is employees don't understand, nor frankly do they care about the difference between the different ticket types. There's incidents, RITMs, HR cases, workplace cases, and it can be really confusing for them to keep track of everything, and they shouldn't, right? To the employee, they just want a service and they don't really care who's supposed to give them that service. They just want to log it and then carry on with their jobs. And that's what we want them to do. Employees can't find what they're looking for. Employees submitted the wrong ticket. And this doesn't just have to be the end user employees. That could also be your tier one. We often hear that sometimes tier one is a little disconnected from the rest of the organization. And sometimes even they will log the wrong tickets. And then it leads to a dead end where a new ticket needs to be created for the right service. So universal request helps alleviate those dead ends and allows that connectivity to go from ticket to ticket whenever that transfer needs to happen. Employees have to submit multiple tickets to get one service fulfilled. So for example, if they need something that needs to be fulfilled by legal and HR, instead of having to create 2 tickets, they can create one and then have that handoff happen by the agents behind the scenes. Or employees have inconsistent information on the requests between the different products that we have. From the agent side, agents cannot easily transfer to other departments, and collaboration is often needed, especially these days. They cannot seamlessly task employees to provide more information. This specific problem is actually resolved by a sister feature called Universal Task, which is separate from Universal Request, but we will cover it a little bit on this call as well. And then from the GBS owner, or it could even be an ESM owner, or even potentially sometimes this role is played by the platform owner. The problems that Universal Request solves here is that they do not have a view of the end-to-end performance of the enterprise service delivery processes. So they can see, how the IT departments are doing, how the HR departments are doing, but they don't have that collective view of the enterprise service delivery processes. And they have limited insights on the cross-departmental collaboration as well. All right. I will also call out, because I do see this question came up in the chat. You do have the ability to connect Universal Request to custom apps as long as they are employee facing. So as long as it's, with an employee within the organization that's requesting a service, for example, finance could be a custom application. As long as it's just not like an external customer, that's where the restrictions would lie. So if it's an internal employee facing service, you can absolutely integrate it with Universal Request. Now, another question we often get is how is Universal Request different from interactions? So many of you are probably familiar with the concept of an interaction record. Previously to that was the call record. So the new call capability that was available before the Orlando release. Basically, the interaction record or the call record before that was a temporary record that you would create as a call agent to capture notes of a conversation that you're having before you determine what to do next. So that's why it used to be called call. Now interaction records are used also for chat. Any chat, whether a virtual or live chat, comes in as an interaction record to handle a conversation. This is to allow fulfillers to focus on the employee and the conversation and not try to navigate to a specific table before they even know what the requester is calling about. Now, an interaction is not a task type. It is not a request for work. It's just, think of it as like a notepad that you're writing down your notes in before you determine what needs to happen next. You can have multiple interactions associated to a task. For example, if an employee has called, 3 times to ask about the status of one incident, you wouldn't create 3 incidents. You would just associate the 3 different calls to the existing incident because they're trying to follow up on something that already exists. So no new task needs to be created. And there's no end-to-end reporting capabilities. There's no SLAs on the interaction. It is really a moment in time record to capture a conversation that was had, whether over the phone or through chat, between an agent and the employee. It is also created by the agents. It is not created by an employee. Or in the case of chat, it would be created by the system for the chat itself. The purpose of the universal request is a type of task to connect multiple other tasks together when work needs to be performed. So a universal request would only be created and linked to a working task, so like a department task, when a new department task needs to be created. So it is something that is created by the employee itself, the end user, not the agent. We would not want agents to create universal requests. The employee would log the universal request through one of the two scenarios I showed on the previous slides, whether it's just the simple universal request because they couldn't find what they needed, or a request that is linked to a universal request. It is visible to fulfillers and employees. It is extended to the tasks table, so you can have SLAs on the universal request. You can only have one universal request associated with one or multiple records. It allows you to transfer tickets across departments, so the interaction does not allow the transferability. You can create a ticket off an interaction, but once that ticket's created, you can't transfer it. It doesn't allow that transferability. And it allows end-to-end reporting between the tickets involved. So if you think about who's creating these records, the interaction is a back-end record created by an agent or chat. The universal request is a front-end record created by the employee that agents don't really interact with, but it allows them to transfer the tickets that they do work with. All right, does that kind of make sense? We get this question a lot, and so it's just something to keep in mind. The personas are different. Now, in a scenario where organizations are using interactions, which this universal request is not intended to replace them, the flow or the ideal flow would be an interaction comes in either through chat or through phone call. An agent handles the conversation. If they deem a new ticket needs to be created, so it doesn't already exist, the employee is not checking a status of something that already exists. So if they know that something new needs to be created, they can go ahead and create that incident or HR case directly from the interaction. And then a universal request would automatically be created and linked to that other record. So that way, if they created the wrong ticket or the agent of the first ticket needs to transfer it, they can do that. So the universal request is the accompanying record that would allow transferability of any task that's created. All right, so this is if you are using an interaction, you can go ahead and just create the department ticket directly and have the UR automatically created. I see in the chat, there's a question that says, why wouldn't you want an agent to create a universal request ticket? You wouldn't, because we don't want to create a duplication of work. A universal request itself isn't what's being worked on. The department ticket that's associated to it is what's being worked on. So if an agent is creating a record, we want them to create the record that is being worked on and automate the UR being appended to it. Because if they were creating the UR first, somebody would still need to then go triage it. And so we want to eliminate that duplication. We want the agents creating the incident directly, the HR case directly, but have the UR linked to it. And that way, if it does need to be transferred, they can go ahead and do that. So we're trying to minimize the work for the agents to get the work in the right hands. All right. Now, another feature that I referred to briefly is called universal task. So this is separate from universal request. They are actually not linked or dependent on each other, but it is a sister feature available in the store. Universal tasks are the first type of employee task that we have created outside of our HR product suite to allow employees to take action on their requests. So it's a to-do item. And this is actually extremely beneficial outside of HR or outside of products where we already have employee-facing tasks. So the most common example I give here is ITSM. When an employee submits, an incident and it should have been a service request, there's no way before universal task to send a task back to the employee, the end user, and say, hey, can you please submit this catalog item and actually have it embedded in the form? Or can you please, upload a document? Can you please follow this checklist? Can you give me more information? So it is essentially a task that the agent who's working on a ticket can send back to the employee, and it's linked to the original ticket. So for example, in this screenshot, you have an incident. An agent is creating a universal task off of the incident to ask the employee to submit a catalog item instead. Again, this eliminates the dead ends by directing the employee where you want them to go, and it all links back to the original ticket. So this is available for any Pro SKU. So if you have ITSM Pro or any other Pro product, you can then install Universal Task. It is not a separate licensed item. All right. Now, another question that we get is regarding universal request and sensitive information. So because we are adding an extra layer on top of our other products, one of the big concerns is security. You obviously have HR tickets, which you do not want visible to IT. You have, specific things maybe in legal that you don't want visible to HR. And so something that I want to call out very specifically is that universal request does not give you insight into a table that you do not already have access to. So if you are an IT agent working on a universal request, you can see that it was linked to another ticket. But if you don't have access to the HR table, you won't see that it was an HR ticket. You won't see the case number. You won't see any of the information that you are not privy to. When it starts off as an HR ticket and it's being transferred to IT, the agent who's transferring, the HR agent, can specify if they want to copy details or not. So they can indicate only what IT needs to know. For example, please unlock this access without IT needing to see anything that was involved in the HR case before that. So a question that we get is, who can see a universal request once it's marked as restricted? So there's 3 different paths. One is if the UR is not assigned to a department group and does not have a primary ticket associated to it. So that's that worst case scenario I was talking about, where it comes in as a generic UR and it's not been automatically triaged to a department. In that case, the universal request would be visible to agents from any department who have the sensitive info agent role. So this is a role that's separate from the universal request role. It's an elevated role, and it should only really be given to potentially team leads of each department. And that way, if the universal request comes in and it's restricted and it's not been assigned to any department, only those team leads can see that original request. But once they assign it to a department and create a ticket off of it, then it's only visible to the people from that department or in the assignment group of that other ticket. So once it's assigned to HR, then only people in HR with the additional sensitive info agent role can see it. And when a universal request is marked as restricted, the short description, attachments, and comments in the activity stream are hidden from the agent who's looking at the universal request record. All right. So it's a lot of information, but we will be making this deck available and the recording, of course, as well on our community page. And so you will be able to reference it afterwards as well. So there's a lot of different scenarios and implications, but basically we wanted to make sure that universal requests do not compromise the security of the other records that employees might be using. So now we're actually going to go ahead into a demo, and I'm going to pull up my instance. Pooja, while I do that, do we want to see if there's any questions we want to call out specifically?
I think one of the main questions that we're getting, you'll probably answer in this, like, do you need Employee Center, what it would look like from behavior perspective on Employee Center? And in extension to that, can this be grouped by fulfillment area or business function to clearly display the types of open requests? I think that's on the ticketing page.
Okay, awesome. So we'll definitely get to that. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and share my instance. Let me know when you can see it.
Not yet.
I'm just
we see okay. There you go, we see it.
Awesome. All right, so now I'm logged in as Joe employee in the Employee Center. So this is the new Employee Center portal, and this is our unified portal, which if you've been on any of our Academy sessions for UR, you would be familiar with this. And it is our cross-departmental enterprise portal. So you see Joe employee has access to requests for IT, workplace, risk, and HR. But it can still be a little bit confusing, especially if he doesn't know if his request is supposed to go to IT or HR. And so Joe employee is going to submit a request for accessing his payroll information. So he tried to access his payroll system and he's getting an error message. So cannot access payroll information. And he does a search. All right, so now because it's a unified portal, he's going to see results from all different departments, whether that's a catalog item, whether that's a knowledge article, And you can obviously configure as an organization how many requests you want to show up before they have to scroll. So Joe is going to search. We give him an opportunity to look for what he needs. And if he finds it, then that's awesome. If he doesn't, at the end of the page, he has the option to call, chat, or request for help. And this is where that general request for help form for a universal request would first show up. So this is still following scenario 1, where we're submitting a general request. So here we're saying, I cannot access my payroll system. Getting an error message. All right. Now, Joe employee has the option of indicating if this request is sensitive. If it is, he can select a department if he knows what the department is. If he doesn't, he can select, I'm not sure. Now, a configuration tip that I would give you all, something that I do on my own instance, is I actually show this question regardless of if they select sensitive or not. The reason that this is a good question to have and maybe make it not mandatory is because if they select a department, it'll automatically create a ticket for that department. And so it doesn't need to be triaged. So it's one less UR that needs to be triaged. And if it goes to the IT department and it wasn't supposed to, the IT department monitoring their incidents can then transfer it to the right place. So it's just another way to accelerate or bypass the routing, the triaging of the UR. And it's just a tip if that's something that works for your organization. Now, here he's going to say it contains sensitive information, so he can select HR, and then he's going to go ahead and click on submit. So because he selected HR, it's going to bypass the triaging and create an HR case. Now, to Joe employee, he's only going to see the UR number. Behind the scenes, however, it's going to create an HR case linked to a universal request. So Joe can still put comments. So please see attached, for example, the error message I am getting. And he's actually posting on the HR case. He just doesn't know that because there's the UR front end that's hiding all the complexities behind the scenes. All right, so that's the view that the employee would get on the Employee Center. Now, before I jump ahead, I'm actually going to go ahead and log a different request as well, just in the interest of time. Joe employee is also having issues with his laptop. So he has a broken laptop and there's an issue with that. So he's actually going to go ahead and create an incident. Okay. This is an example where you can submit a specific item. So this is a specific record producer that will create an IT incident, but it will also create a universal request appended to it. So my laptop is broken. And this is scenario 2, where I looked for what I needed, I found it, and I logged it, but it also has a UR associated. Most of the time, the incident can just be closed out and no UR needs to be looked at by any agent. But if, for example, a laptop is broken and it starts out as an incident and they need to transfer it to, for example, a service request to request a new one, now it can be transferred and the employee is still monitoring just the one universal request number. So those were the 2 different scenarios that I outlined. And if you're wondering where to go configure those catalog items, here's a view as an admin on the different record producers that you have. There is a field called UR certified that you would just need to set to true. And basically what that does is it retains everything from your record producer, but it will also create a UR at the same time. And that allows your requests to be masked essentially by a UR and allow that transferability. So now I'm going to go ahead as our HR user and see what they see once that first universal request was submitted. So the employee submitted that they couldn't see their payroll system information. And now the HR agent is going to see that case. So as an HR agent, I am looking at my HR cases list. I'm not looking at universal requests. I am in my HR agent workspace, and this is the queue that I am looking at. So we want to minimize the impact on the agents. Now, as my HR agent, I am notified that there is a UR associated to this HR case. I can click into it if I would like to, and it'll just open up a separate tab for information. I can see the information on the UR, but I don't really need to do anything with the UR. Now I can unrestrict it if I wanted to, but I could do that on the HR case directly. And that would basically just mean that other users who have access to the UR can also see the UR if they need to. So if it's not something like a harassment case or something with sensitive information, as an agent, I can unrestrict it if needed. So I showed you that Joe employee was adding some additional notes on the activity stream in the portal. And for the HR agent, they see that on their HR case. They're not looking at the UR for information. So the UR is just a nice to know. The agent doesn't need to do anything about it. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and assign the ticket over to this HR agent. Now, once the HR case is assigned to the HR agent, they now have the ability to start work or transfer it. So in this case, they can actually just go ahead and transfer it and say, hey, this is actually not for HR, it's for IT. And this is the transfer button, which is different than our other HR transfer to another HR service. This is transferring across departments. So you, as an HR agent, I can transfer to IT, workplace, legal, and this is really what separates universal request from interactions. Interactions cannot do this. And it also separates it from general inquiries because they cannot do that either. So in this case, I'm going to send it to the IT department. Now I can select to transfer with or without resolution. This is for your reporting needs. So with resolution means that I did something for my HR case. There was work that was completed and the HR case is going to be marked as closed complete. But then there's another part of the work that needs to be sent to IT and the UR stays open. Transfer without resolution means that there was no work done on the HR case and it came in by mistake. So this would close the HR case as incomplete or canceled. The UR still stays open and then the new ticket gets created. So in both scenarios, you're creating a new ticket under the same UR and the UR is staying open. But the difference is the close code of your first ticket. It's either going to be canceled because it wasn't supposed to get there at all, or it's going to be completed because work was done and now another team needs to do their part. So it's just for reporting purposes and you can configure those on your end as well. So in this case, we're going to say transfer without resolution because it came to HR by mistake. And we're going to say, hello, IT department, please fix the access needed for Joe employees payroll system. This is not something HR can help with. All right. Now, as an HR agent, I can select if I want to copy additional comments and attachments. So because Joe put comments that are relevant, I can choose to copy them. If Joe had put sensitive information, I could uncheck this box and then only give IT the information that they need in the transfer notes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that transfer. And now you'll see that the general inquiry HR case was closed incomplete and it was successfully transferred to an incident while the universal request stays open. Okay, and that's the behavior that we would want to see. Now, as the IT user, a new incident has been created. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that IT user is going to see. So for the IT user, they're most likely working out of the service operations workspace. So they're going to go ahead and look at all open incidents. And they are going to find this incident. All right. And so in the incident, they can see the transfer notes that was left to them by HR, but they may not see the details of the universal request if they don't have access. Okay. And it also tells them that there's a universal request associated to it, and they have that historic context that they need. So now as the IT agent, I'm going to go ahead and assign it to myself. Might be a little bit delayed. All right, so now it's assigned to me, and I can create an associated ticket if there needs to be work in parallel. So this is a really cool feature that we didn't have when we first released Universal Request. Before, you could only have one department ticket at a time for Universal Request. And the biggest problem for our customers was, well, what if we need work to happen in parallel? What if we need legal and HR to work on something for the same request? You couldn't do that before. So now create associated ticket is, instead of a transfer where you're closing this ticket and creating a new one, you're keeping this ticket open because you're working on it, but you need a sibling ticket for another department to work on at the same time for the same universal request. So instead of it just being sequential, you can now have parallel work from different departments under the same universal request. The caveat to that is there's still only going to be one ticket that's driving the universal request state and activity stream. So there's still only one primary ticket, which in this case would still be the incident. But there would be other associated tickets at the same time that are being worked. All right. So in this case, we don't need to create an associated ticket. We're actually just going to go ahead and work on it and say, hi, Joe, I have fixed your access issue. You should now be good to go. All right. So this is the IT user that is posting comments on the incident. All right, as the ITIL user, and they're going to go ahead and resolve it. They're going to say it's solved permanently, restored access to Joe's payroll system. All right. Now, another incident that came in for the ITIL users was the laptop that was broken. So this was an incident that Joe employee submitted directly, where he used the create incident form, and it submitted an incident to IT saying my laptop is broken. Now, as an IT user, again, I'm monitoring this in my incident queue. I'm being told that there's a UR, and that's good information to have, but I don't need to do anything with it. I can actually go ahead and click on add employee task, because in this case, the laptop is broken and Joe would have to submit a catalog item to request a new one. And that would be under our service catalog. So instead of just closing the incident and saying, hey, please log a new request, I can actually go ahead and create an employee task, because when you're submitting a catalog item, there's a bunch of questions that you might want to answer, like what color do you want? What size do you want? What type do you want? And I don't, as an agent, I don't want to have to decide those things on behalf of the employee. So the easiest way to do that is to create a universal task. So this is what that is. And that's the store app I was telling you about earlier, where you can have different types of universal tasks. You can ask them to submit a catalog item. You can ask them to upload documents, follow a checklist. You can ask information, or you can tell them to complete training, for example, and let you know when it's done. So this is a way to give the employee something to do as part of the fulfillment of the request. Now, for this example, I'm going to ask them to submit a catalog item, and I'm actually going to put the specific catalog item I want them to fill out. So this, again, eliminates dead ends, and it gives the employee exactly what they need. You see that it's assigned to the requester. This is only intended to be used for end users, not for agents, to give them work to do for the fulfillment of the request. And then it would say, hi, Joe, please submit this catalog item to request a new laptop since yours cannot be fixed. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and click save. And that shows you essentially the different activities or the experience from the employee when submitting the request. It shows you the experience from the agents who are receiving their department tickets from a universal request. It shows you the experience from an agent who is transferring. It shows you the experience from the agent who's receiving the transfer, and also as a bonus, the universal task experience. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back to show you the experience of the employee. So Joe employee, after the work has been done on his requests, to show you what that experience is from the Employee Center portal. All right. Now, from the request that he submitted about his broken laptop, we added a universal task, and it shows up in his request. So he's not going somewhere else. He's monitoring his broken laptop request. So this was the request that he first submitted. And now he sees a tab show up that says, please submit this catalog item. So he's following up on his universal request. A new activity shows up. He fills this out. He doesn't have to go to a separate form, and then he can go ahead and click order now. So this is extremely powerful for the employee-facing tasks that are needed. Joe employee can also go monitor his other universal request, which was for his payroll access, which is over here. And now you see the comments that was made where it went to an HR case. He added some comments. It was transferred to the IT department. And then he sees the resolution notes. And now he sees that it is in the awaiting response, so he can just go ahead and close it. So the objective really was to tie everything together, hide the complexities behind the scenes, and allow collaboration between departments. That is the end of this demo. I know we only have a few minutes left to take on some questions. I saw some questions about whether it makes sense to certify all of your catalog items. It does. And we actually have a property so that you don't have to go into every single one of them. And you can just turn on that property, and basically any record producer or catalog item will create a universal request at the same time. The reason you would want to do that is because you can't add a universal request to a ticket after the fact. So it's either created at the same time as your ticket or it's not. So you would want the universal request to be appended to your request, and to do that, you would need to certify your record producers. The other configuration that we shipped in Tokyo is to allow universal requests to be created as part of an agent creating a request. So if your service desk is creating an incident, you don't want them to have to create a universal request and then an incident. So you can automate the UR creation directly when an agent is also creating the ticket, not just through your record producers. All right, Pooja, were there any specific questions that you wanted to call out before we kind of just go through the list?
Is agent workspace required for your universal request?
It's not. So this demo was just to show you that your agents can use whatever they were using before. They don't need to go somewhere new. Whether your agents are using the legacy view or agent workspace, it doesn't have any impact. All right.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There is a question I saw come up a couple times on whether it works for separate instances. Unfortunately, it does not. The intention of universal request is to bring everything together that's on the same instance. You could create a custom integration if that's something that you have the bandwidth and capacity to do, but right now it's really just for department tables on your existing, on your single instance. All right. Now I'm looking at the chat. There's a question that says, in the worst case scenario, it seems that you would need to pick which team would triage these requests. Do you have any suggestions or best practices on which function or team would need to do this and how we should get that set up? So my answer to that is it really depends. So if it's the employee at the time of submission where they're being asked to pick a department, what you can do is just through trial and education. If they picked IT and it really wasn't supposed to be IT, next time they'll know because it'll tell them that it was transferred. If it's your tier 1 service desk, you can report on, and we actually deliver reports that show how often URs are being transferred. And if they're being transferred without resolution, that's your indication that it was sent to the wrong place because no work was done by that first team. And so by monitoring those kinds of use cases, you can start creating knowledge associated to that and teaching your tier 1 teams, when it's this type of request, this is where it should go. And it's educating them on the workings within the organization. So it really depends on who's creating the request and picking the department. And then obviously through our predictive intelligence, it's going to learn, more and more that universal requests are created and triaged. All right. Now I'm going to check any other question. And Pooja, if there's anyone that's screaming out at you, please let me know.
Yep.
For scenario 2, the agent still needs to manually intervene. And based on the UR defined for the catalog item, the ticket can be transferred to incident and HR. Can PI not be applied here? So this is a great question. When you have in scenario 2, the universal request comes in through a specific item. For example, I created the create incident record producer. It also created a UR. The only time a triaging agent would need to intervene is if the agent who received the incident clicked on transfer and didn't select a department, because then that would just send the UR back to that generic queue. In that case, predictive intelligence could kick in if you have it enabled. So it would create the UR, and then predictive intelligence would try to auto route it somewhere else. If you do not have predictive intelligence enabled, then it would just show up in that scorecard I was talking about, where your triaging team would be monitoring any UR that's open that doesn't have a primary ticket, and then they would just go in and select a department from there. All right. Now there's a question that says we have about 40 App Engine scoped apps that all have their own ticket types. Sometimes the teams that use these scoped apps work cross-functionally on a workflow as request moves from team to team. Can Universal Request treat scoped app tickets as department tickets the same way it does out of the box? Yes. So you can integrate custom applications. Again, as long as they're employee facing, you can add them in your service departments and service configuration. All right. If we have tier 1 teams in each function and you say they would look at a scorecard for a UR ticket that doesn't have a parent ticket type, I'm a bit confused on the ones that are not clear if they're for a specific item. Example, which of those functional tier 1 teams would look at these worst case scenario tickets, or are you saying it would be all of them? Wouldn't they have the opportunity to create duplicate teams working on it? So it depends. The Universal Request has a department field, even if it doesn't have a primary ticket associated to it. So if it has a department associated to the UR, you can filter your scorecard based on department. If you just have a general queue looking at all universal requests that need to be triaged, you would not filter on them. But again, that number should be few and far between. If you're associating URs to your service requests and your record producers, if you are using predictive intelligence and you are asking the employee to pick a department as an optional request, that number should go down significantly. But you have the option. You can either use the department to filter, or you can show any universal request that does not have a primary ticket to be triaged. All right, so the different instances we talked about, it would unfortunately need a custom integration. I know that we are at time, so Pooja, how would we go about, I guess, the rest of these questions?
Yep. Thank you, Caroline. We will just take all of these questions as Q&A and put it on our event page on community. That is also the place where you will find recording of this session. And we will shortly share a link for all the previous recording as well, because I see that question on chat as well. Okay. Yeah, so we're good to close. And Caroline, if there's anything that you want to just end with, we can call it, we can close the session after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next month.